Has Berserk gotten worse? Now you might be wondering where this question comes from or as to why I have to address this in a video. But throughout my time on YouTube, especially making Berserk content, I've gotten a lot of comments kind of complaining about how Berserk has changed from how it used to be in the Black Swordsman arc and in the Conviction arc. Now for those of you that know, those are obviously the two darkest arcs in Berserk, or at least the two darkest so far. The Golden Age arc wasn't extremely dark as a whole, but you know, we did have the eclipse, so that counts for something. But as for an overall arc, obviously the two darkest has to be Black Swordsman and Conviction. So many times I hear a lot of complaints about how Berserk just doesn't feel the same as it used to before. I was seeing a good amount of upset about the newest chapter, with a lot of people saying, is that it? Really? I saw a few Lollywitch Academia comments as well, which was kind of humorous, but if I'm being completely honest with everybody, I think we're overreacting a little bit. It's very different reading a story one chapter at a time versus reading the whole story and rereading it to kind of put it all together within its context. When you read chapter 360 by itself, it seems a little underwhelming, but when you read it right after 359 or you take the time to kind of reread some of the recent events, it's very appropriate, and it does what almost every chapter in Berserk has always done. Left us asking more questions or answering the big ones, and this time it just left us asking more questions about what's next, which I think is very necessary for a series that has frequent hiatuses. And so at the time when I did my review on chapter 360, it did feel a little underwhelming because chapter 359 was supposed to be the big reunion. When I look back on it, chapter 360 was just fine. And that applies to a bigger scale, which is the Fantasia arc. Right now, we kind of judge the Fantasia arc a little unjustly because it hasn't been finished, and again because of hiatus. Since we know we're not going to get another chapter for a little bit, we seem a little upsetting. Now, I also saw some comments referring to Berserk coming out May 9th. I'm pretty sure that was referring to Doranki, not Berserk, but I'm pretty sure it's just referring to Doranki. So when I talk about Berserk getting worse, what do I mean by that, really? I'm talking about in terms of quality and art style, because those are usually the complaints I see the most, mostly being art style, and then at times just the overall tone of the series. As I brought up before, the Conviction arc and the Black Swordsman arc are the two darkest in Berserk, and the Golden Age arc and the Conviction arc are easily the best arcs in all of Berserk. Now, I did do a video ranking all of the arcs in Berserk, and I had the Golden Age arc barely above the Conviction arc, but again, either of those arcs you can't go wrong. And so if you compare the Golden Age arc and the Conviction arc to the arcs that have come afterwards, which has been the Millennium Falcon arc and the Fantasia arc, well then of course you could say technically Berserk has gotten worse. But I don't really think that's the appropriate term to use, because you can't really separate an individual arc unless you're trying to do a ranking like I did in that one video, but every arc needs the other one. The Black Swordsman arc had the most flaws, I would say, out of all of the arcs in Berserk, but without the Black Swordsman arc, I don't think the Golden Age arc would have been as good. And so on and so forth applies to all of the other arcs. If we look at the Millennium Falcon arc, the Millennium Falcon arc is where the most gets done within the story of Berserk. It's also where we have most of the cool moments with Guts putting on the Berserker armor, Guts and Zod teaming up, and again, just all these things get done. Griffith with his kingdom, and Guts taking the necessary steps closer to getting Casca's mind back. And when you kind of look at it, the Millennium Falcon arc and the Fantasia arc has had the best world building when it comes to the story of Berserk so far. The Conviction arc, the Golden Age arc, did have world building, a lot more than the Black Swordsman arc, but I think the Millennium Falcon, and especially Fantasia, does a much better job of building the world of Berserk. And so I think the Millennium Falcon arc and the Fantasia arc, along with continuing the progression of the story, adds things to Berserk that make it even more of a masterpiece. And honestly, if you just went Black Swordsman arc, Golden Age arc, you could already consider that, like, the Golden Age arc alone was a masterpiece, but if you took Black Swordsman, Golden Age, and Conviction, Berserk right there, then leave it there, masterpiece. And then you see some of the more development of Guts' character in the Millennium Falcon arc, and then we have the Fantasia arc right now where some of the things are starting to get wrapped up and we get to move on to the end part of Berserk. Again, both of the new arcs do what they need to do, and so I don't really understand where people are coming from when they say Berserk has gotten worse. I can understand maybe saying that Berserk doesn't have the same tone as it did before, and if your preference is a more dark toned story, I completely understand that. But then again, I think Berserk's shift in tone has also been something of benefit to the story. In fact, when people who don't read Berserk and start pointing fingers at it saying it's nothing but edge, blood, and guts, well then, I can kind of point to the two more recent arcs, and although those do have gruesome violence, there's a lot more to those arcs, and a lot more beauty, I think, with the scenery and all of that, that just disproves that statement entirely. Now, of course, Berserk is more than blood, guts, and edge in the first 3 arcs as well, but you know how people are sometimes. I think one of the best ways to put it is how Ryan did in the stream we did on his channel, and it's currently in the Fantasia arc, we're kind of getting more of a calm before the storm. Everything seems to be settling down, which is extremely appropriate considering we're just getting Casca's mind back, but even then, it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows. Berserk not being the same tone anymore, and maybe not the same feel as it was in the Black Swordsman arc, again, I think is a great thing. When we had the introduction of Guts' new crew with Farnese, apparently I'm not supposed to say Farnese, but whatever, Serpico, Puck, Isidro, Shirka, it all kind of feels like it was in the Golden Age arc, and that's the point. Seeing Guts now regain some of the things he lost back in the Eclipse. Seeing Guts slowly move away again from the mindless killing machine that he once was to somewhat becoming a wise man if you think about it. His reaction to what just happened in chapter 360 just shows me exactly how much he's really grown compared to what he did when Casca first lost her mind and he left and abandoned her for 2 years. Now, I did a video yesterday talking about Guts possibly leaving with the Skull Knight in Elfheim, but thanks to some of the comments that pointed it out, I think if Guts stays, that kind of shows a little more how much he's grown and matured. Denying the Skull Knight and this time making what he thinks is the right decision and staying regardless. And so that's really just a small example out of many you could pull out of the Fantasia arc and the Millennium Falcon arc, where we see how far Guts' character has come from when he was at the beginning of the Conviction arc. And so when you look at it on all fronts so far, when it comes to Guts' development and progression, when it comes to the rest of the character's progression, the introduction of the new characters, and the world building, if not, Berserk has just advanced more instead of getting worse. Again, the only complaint I could see people having is it not feeling the same, but that's really just preference. That's not really the story getting worse. So far, we haven't really had any major plot holes in the story that people can point to, like the ending of Naruto, where, you know, that was the big complaint. There was a ton of plot holes and a ton of just meh decisions that ended up ruining the ending of Naruto Shippuden. And now that I brought that up, now that I think about it, I would much rather have Miura take his time and there be some hiatus for Berserk to end well, instead of him rushing it and there being a horrible ending. Right? I mean, by the way Miura's kind of set himself up, I don't really think there's a way for Berserk to have a bad ending. But really going back to the topic of Berserk getting worse, I think the only other thing people really point to, as I brought up earlier, was the artwork. Look, Berserk's artwork, I think, has progressively just gotten better. Right? We see how Guts looked in the Black Swordsman arc and in the Golden Age arc, and although I would agree with most people, I think Guts's and just Berserk's overall look in the Conviction arc is probably my favorite as well. I think some of the detail and again the scenery we see in the Fantasia and the Millennium Falcon arc has been just superb and amazing and just keeps getting better. It seems to subtly give Berserk a different feel more and more as it changes and the story progresses. Like when you're reading through it, you don't really notice too many of the differences as you read it straight through, but when you just look at the images by themselves and side-by-side comparison, the way Guts looks, if you look at it in all of the other arcs, it's kind of drastic, the changes we've seen with Guts' appearance. I think something that I would say about the artwork is it did feel a lot more raw, and again, I like the aesthetic of it more in the Conviction arc, but I don't really have any complaints about how it looked now. Like in that final panel where you see Skull Knight and Guts together, that looks absolutely amazing. And so when it comes to the art style, I think that's more of a point of preference, and when it comes to the overall story and narrative of Berserk, there hasn't been anything in the recent chapters or in the recent arc that has really violated the major themes of Berserk. And I've said this in other videos, but I feel like I really need to say it again here. Berserk is more than just depression, darkness, and blood. In the One Piece video I did, you would not believe the amount of comments I got of people repeating the one phrase, One Piece isn't about the world changing the person, it's about the person changing the world. And if I were to come up with a phrase like that for Berserk, I would have to say it's a person struggling against a cruel world that he cannot change, and finding his purpose in said world. And so now that Guts' journey has kind of reached its end when it comes to Casca, or at least it seems so at the current moment, now Guts asked himself the same question we did as the reader, what now and what next? And I love how Miura threw that in there, because when you read it and you think about it, that's always been the question with Guts' character. What now and what next? It's the question he's always asked himself, and it's always the question we ask ourselves, the readers, about Berserk. Now, as we wait for the next chapter, and hopefully when the next chapter comes out, you take some of the things I said here into consideration, and maybe rereading chapter 360 after rereading maybe chapter 350 all the way to chapter 360 might give it more of its context and make it seem more appropriate. That way we don't blow up 1 or 2 chapters about witches and stuff into an entire arc. Trust me, I understand your frustration as good as anybody. When a new chapter of Berserk comes out, I kid you not, like the channel doubles in every analytical category. So with that being said, let's all just hope the new chapter doesn't take too long to come out. And as always, if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, turn on the bell notifications, that way you're notified when a new video pops up on some of your favorite Berserk content. As always, this has been the Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.